Good evening. It's Sunday night, 9 o'clock. It's time for Stories in the Magic Library. Tune in if you're here. Tell us where you're from. Say hi. Hey, Charles. Andrew. So grab your bourbon. Let's get started. Hi, Luis. Missy. Hi. Hi, Juan Osorio Martinez. Welcome. Charles. Hey, Aunt Jane. Hi, Greer. Lisa. So spread the word. Invite your friends to tune in. And we're going to pick up where we left off last night. We're reading Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa, an unconventional memoir about my time living in the old Louisville Historic Preservation District. Hey, Susan. Barbara. Hi, Bonnie. Karen. There are some leftovers, Karen, so you got to come get them, though. Jamie. Yeah, happy Easter, everyone. I hope you had a good Easter. Hope you're all doing okay. A little rainy and cool in Louisville today. I don't know how the rest of you are faring with the weather, but it was warm. We've got some colder weather coming in. Hey, Justin. So gather your friends around. Hey, Laura. And let's start. So tell people where you're from. Say hi, city, state. Let us know if you're out of country. Let us know what you're drinking. I'm doing Old Forester tonight, so cheers. And last night we kind of ended abruptly. Hey, Beth and Laura. The stream just cut out, and I turned the phone back on, but I couldn't get Facebook to come up. And then I went and grabbed my MacBook. I tried to do it on my MacBook, but it said the camera won't work. So we obviously weren't meant to hear the rest of the story last night. Hi, Mitzi. So we're going to pick up where we left off last night. We just had a couple paragraphs to go to the end. So if you remember, we had read a chapter about my cousins, Pat and Mark, who weren't the best house guests. They wore out their welcome. They had moved on. And then I discovered we had nighttime visitors, not in the ghostly form, but we had rats come into the Widmer house. And so I decided I was going to get rid of the rats, but try other methods other than killing them with poison or deadly traps. And so I had just finally caught my first rat. I thought it was a mouse, though, so I only had a mouse trap. And the trap didn't kill it. As I was taking it out to the garbage, it came back to life. And then I decided, to drown it in the swimming pool, except I threw it in the swimming pool. Hey, Becky. And it kind of revived it. So I think I left off, or we were cut short right after I fished it out of the water, right? I think it was good grief, I said. Was this really happening? So I threw the trap with the rat on into the swimming pool. I was going to let it drown, but then I felt guilty, and I saw the rat at the bottom of the pool pushing itself across the bottom, trying to get to the other side. So I dove in head first, picked it up with a pair of tongs, and unloosened the trap and let the rat out, except it bounced back into the water. So instead of falling to the ground, it bounced back into the water. So this is where we left off last night. I said, good grief, was this really happening? I watched his little snout poked up from the surface of the water, and his legs started kicking. He paddled across the surface to the other side of the pool, but unless I helped, his only options were to end up at the bottom of the pool again or in the strainer basket. Both of them involved drowning. So I ran to the opposite side of the pool to render assistance. But when the creature saw me waiting for him, he turned around and swam back to the initial point of entry. So I ran back around again, but once more he steered himself in the other direction when I came into his field of vision. I guess I couldn't blame him, since I no doubt represented a great deal of bodily harm in his little rodent mind. Remembering the long-handled skimmer with its mesh catcher, I dislodged the implement from its horizontal spot along the fence and managed to scoop the creature out of the water. I walked down several steps and then deposited him in the lettuce patch, not more than 2 yards from the side of the pool. I expected the rat to be paralyzed or mangled from his injuries, but given that I had misjudged him a mouse and had bought a mousetrap, the larger rodent was only stunned. I collapsed next to him in a patch of arugula. Out of breath, I studied the wet, panting form and waited. He coughed and spat up a mouthful of water. Then he raised himself up and gave himself a good shake. He slowly crawled to the fence, eyeing me warily as he looked back over his shoulder, and inserted himself in a 2-inch knothole in the wood. Please stay away and don't come back, I wheezed as the last little bit of rat tail disappeared through the gap in the fence, because it's time to revert to Plan D. We're getting poison. And that's when I heard a crash in the house. Okay, so that ends that chapter, and that was dedicated to Becky Stackhouse, and she loved it so much. So, we've got a number of chapters we can read tonight, so it depends how long you want to hang in there with me. Sunday night, I don't know what you have got going on tomorrow morning. I don't have too much, so I can stay up and read. But yeah, check in, tell people where you're from, say hi, let us know what you're drinking. Someone, I don't know if I mentioned this, someone proposed every time Ramon calls me a hobo in the reading, we should all drink bourbon. So I'll prepare us. I don't know if he calls me a hobo in any of these upcoming chapters, but if he calls me a hobo, then we have to drink whatever we're drinking, okay? So our next chapter, it's called Voodoo Queens, Witches, and Gypsies. So remember, I was out with the rat in the lettuce patch, and all of a sudden I heard a big crash in the house, so I ran inside. So after grabbing a towel that had been left to dry, I patted the moisture out of my hair and hurried inside. Nobody else was home, so I could only wonder at the loud crash. It sounded like something heavy and solid had fallen and caused the whole house to shake. Although previous crashes had invariably yielded no visible explanation for their causes, I still expected to find something broken, or at least out of place, when I entered the house. But once again, a thorough search of all 3 floors, the basement, and attic yielded absolutely nothing to account for the strange noise. I returned to the foyer, prepared to chalk up the sound to settling timbers. The evening weather forecast had warned of high temperatures for the following day, so I decided to close the shutters and keep out the sun in the morning. As I approached the large window in the foyer, I jumped back, startled by a figure standing outside the window. Trying to stay out of view, I pulled back a bit of lace and peered into the darkness. A narrow shaft of light from the nearest street lamp cast a soft glow around a dark silhouette in the space between the houses. Trance-like, someone was staring into the house. Louis? I thought to myself. The grizzled old man kept showing up for odd jobs around the yard, although Ramon usually had to haggle with him to get his quotes reduced by at least 900%, but he always refused to come to the door. Instead, he'd take a position outside the foyer window and wait till somebody spotted him. I walked out onto the front porch and looked around the side of the house. Louis, is that you? Silently, the form approached me and came to stand in the light. It was a grizzled old man, but it wasn't Louis. No, but Louis sent me, he said. I'm Frederick. He can't come no more, and he told me to come and look after the yard, work at your beautiful house here. Oh, I said, wondering if Frederick would show the same tendency to gouge as his predecessor. Well, Ramon's the one in charge of the yard work and stuff, and he's not here, so come back tomorrow and talk to him. I said goodbye and turned to go. Hey, Ashley. Hey, Amanda. This house is pretty, but it's mad at someone, he quickly called after me. I stopped short of pulling open the door and looked back at him. Huh? Frederick took a couple steps toward me and repeated his observation. And why is that? I said. She is talking to you, and you are not listening. He crossed his arms and nodded his head wisely. Talking to me? Yes, he nodded once. Like she do before you came into the house tonight. She make a big boom to get your attention. Oh, that, I said, remembering the reason I'd come into the house. I thought it was the house settling or something like that. When a house settle, he confided in a low whisper, she don't go boom. Oh, I see. I paused to consider the rationality of his statement. When she make a big boom, she is telling you something. He reached into the breast pocket of his shirt and pulled out a small canvas pouch. You need the voodoo to understand the way. He shook the cloth bag, and the contents produced a hollow, rattling clatter. I hope they weren't dry chicken bones or anything like that. Well, I personally try to avoid voodoo and any other religion involving zombies, I said. His brow wrinkled in an irritated scowl, and one of his hands slapped the empty air. No need to fear the voodoo, only the bad people who do the voodoo, he said. My mama and grandmammy both practiced the voodoo, and they was good women. Their people came here by way of New Orleans. Funny. I didn't really find out till recently that they even had voodoo in Kentucky. Well, we don't have as much as way down south, Frederick said, but it's here. They calls it hoodoo in many parts. Say, something suddenly occurred to me. Have you heard of this woman who runs around in a long skirt and turban? They say she's a voodoo queen and her name is Josephine? Frederick narrowed his eyes slightly and studied me. Yeah, that's the one. Do you know anything about her? Everyone on the streets know Josephine. He turned and gestured to 3rd Street. She was around back in my mama's day. She lived over by the tree over where the old floral gardens used to stand. The place where the witches used to gather. The witches' tree. What's the witches' tree? That old tree where all the witches used to meet, he explained impatiently, and still do. Wait a minute, I said. You're telling me we got voodoo queens and witches down here in old Louisville? A smile started to creep across my features as I pondered the dark side of the neighborhood. Of course we do. Even had lots of gypsies back in the day. No way. Gypsies? I couldn't believe my good fortune. Kentucky had gypsies too? Sure thing. He stood up straight and picked something off his sleeve. What about vampires and werewolves? I asked hopefully. Bloodsuckers, we got. Werewolves, I'm not so sure, though there's a really hairy guy who lived in the park. He narrowed his eyes again and studied me for a brief period before continuing. You'd be surprised at some of the things you see down in this neighborhood, he said. Well, I'm not so sure about that. I've seen some pretty crazy things down here. A woman pushing a shopping cart loudly along the sidewalk passed out front, and I watched her stoop to pick up an abandoned aluminum can and toss it inside. But gypsies, huh? Well, that's a new one to me. Place used to swarm with them. Frederick turned to the side, reached into an interior pocket, and took a long swig from a silver flask. Then he held it out toward me. Want some? No, thanks, I said. I'm fine. On the sidewalk, the retreating shopping cart faded from view with a squeak and a rattle. So, what do you know about this Josephine? Well, she's not a gypsy, said Frederick. She voodoo. Yeah, I said, but does she do the good kind or the bad kind? She's not going to turn me into a zombie or anything like that, is she? Depends on you, he said after taking another dram from the flask, because she does the good and she does the bad kind. So, are you saying she'll do the bad kind if she doesn't like you? Yeah, she's like the stick witch that way. Make her mad, and you better watch out. But, he said, when she's your friend, there's nothing to worry about. Stick witch. Now, who's this again? You've been down here in old Louisville how long and you still don't know about the stick witch? Frederick said. Afraid not, I said sheepishly. She that old witch who runs around with the Kroger cart full of sticks, he explained. She got another cart too, a smaller one. Scours the neighborhood looking for broken branches and twigs for her fire. Probably brews her potions and stuff over under the witch's tree, I said. Yeah, the witch's tree. Frederick looked up into the sky and rocked back on his feet. He closed his eyes and seemed to tilt his head to the side, as if hearing an unseen voice. I racked my brain, trying to conjure an image of the stick witch. Strangely enough, I recalled seeing a woman who fit that description on several different occasions. Have you had good or bad experiences with her? I asked him. I leave her alone and she leave me alone, he said, but I hear she can get mean. Well, what kind of stuff does she do? I asked. In the front yard, there was a rustling as something moved around among Manhattan bushes. Piss her off and you find a bundle of sticks at your front door. Frederick lifted the flask to his lips and took another drink. I recoiled when I remembered the small pile of twigs on the front porch earlier in the year. You get a bundle of sticks, and that's when all the weird shit starts to happen. Like what? I said. You name it, it happened, he said. Watermelons falling out of the air and hitting you in the head, waking up in the morning and finding a yellow monkey eating your tomatoes in the back garden, finding a mule eating from the candy dish down in your living room in the middle of the night, that kind of stuff. I see. I thought back to the bundle of twigs and wondered what I had done to incur her wrath. You know, I found a bunch of sticks on my front steps several months ago. You think I did something to make her mad? You had weird stuff happening here? He squinted his eyes at me. Well, I don't know, I said. You're the one telling me my house is talking to me and making me realize I need to use voodoo. I say that's pretty odd. No. Impatience welled in his voice. Ghost in your house is natural. Spirits are all part of the world, he said. But cakes falling out of the sky and roosters wearing birthday hats is freaky. I guess so, I said. Who know? Frederick drained the last swig from the flask and wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve. Maybe she like you. She doesn't even know me. I watched as he stashed the empty flask in his pants pocket and retrieved the cap of his pouch. That how she is, the stick witch, he said. If she like you, or you do something nice for her, you find a bunch of sticks at your door. If you do something and she's mad at you, you find a bunch of sticks at your door too. He shook the pouch at me and its contents rattled. And then what happens? I asked. What do you mean? He stared at me and then started to move toward the sidewalk in front of the house. Well, what kind of stuff happens when she leaves you the bundle of sticks when she likes you? You win the lottery or something like that? Get a promotion at work? No. He scowled and slapped again at something invisible in the air. Same kind of stuff happened. Like I said before, a cream pie falls out of a tree and hits you in the head when you're walking to work, or you find a jackass eating bonbons out of your Aunt Sally's crystal candy dish. I gasped, suddenly remembering the fat rat hunched over the silver bowl of sugar babies. Oh my God, I whispered. Maybe it was a stick witch. I looked at Frederick. Does a rat eating my sugar babies count? Frederick stood there and stared. Maybe so, maybe not. He turned and started to shuffle down the front walk to the sidewalk. I'll come back tomorrow and talk to this Raymond about doing your yard work. But wait! I ran after him and grabbed his sleeve. What's so good about finding a yellow monkey in your backyard eating your tomatoes? I said. Or finding a donkey with a sweet tooth in your living room? He stopped and turned to look at me. Well, what's so bad about it? He asked. It's all in how you look at it. A yellow monkey eating tomatoes in your backyard could be good? A slight chill tingled the night air, and I rubbed my bare arms to generate some warmth. Yes, he rasped in a throaty laugh. How many people you figure ever wake up in old Louisville and find a yellow monkey eating tomatoes from their garden? I stopped and did a mental tally, quickly arriving at a very low number. Well, I've never seen one, I said. I've never seen one, he said. But I tell you what, I walk out and find me a yellow monkey eating tomatoes in someone's garden one day, it's going to make me grin nice and big. A large smile revealed a mouthful of startlingly white teeth. You know why? He asked. I'll tell you why. Because that's something you don't see now every day, is it? That's something special. Well, I guess I see your point. A smile formed at the thought of the rat hunched over the silver bowl on the counter. Now, some cranky people, they get all bent out of shape at something like that and probably get a gun and shoot the poor monkey, he said. Others would try to pet the monkey and give it a root beer. Yeah, it all depends how you look at things, I said. Exactly, he whispered. Same thing with this here house. He raised a hand to sweep an outline around the facade of Widmer House. Whatever this house is trying to tell you depends on how you listen to it. Well, I guess I'll try to listen better next time, I said. Overhead, there was a soft chittering sound. When I lifted my eyes, the form of a large bat swooped down between the houses and quivered through the columns of the front porch. With a flutter, it vanished around a corner. My eyes were drawn to the stretch of sidewalk in front of the house where cottonwood fluff had collected on the grass like a thin layer of fresh snow. Without a sound, Frederick shuffled down the walkway, crossed the street, and disappeared into the shadows on the other side. Okay, so that was the end of that chapter. So if you're just tuning in, welcome. Grab your bourbon. Got a fan on me. I'm going to turn it the other way. So cheers. We're going to do our next chapter. If you haven't told us where you're from, Taya, did you know I used to call Ramon HR Puffin Stuff? That's funny you're mentioning that. Did I mention that in the book? I don't remember. I loved Puffin Stuff and Witchy Poo. So cheers. Here's to our next chapter. All right. So, Sylvia. There's a part about Sylvia coming up in a bit. So the next chapter is La Casa Fabulosa. It explains how the house got its name. Okay? So y'all ready? Okay, La Casa Fabulosa. Frederick ended up doing a good deal of yard work for us, and his prices were considerably more reasonable than those of Louis, his predecessor. Apart from yard work and gardening tasks, Frederick proved adept as a handyman as well. Little by little, we were able to tackle the remaining projects associated with the exterior of the house. By the time summer officially arrived, the restoration of the facade at Whitmer House had been completed. The cherry pickers were out of the front yard, the scaffolding had been dismantled, and the new paint job gleamed. It was Tuesday night, and glasses in hand, the gang stood in front of the house and admired the lavish facade. In addition to tuck pointing the entire front of the house, we and my cousins had managed to rebuild a number of crumbling window ledges, several ornamental acanthus leaves, and an eroded piece of terracotta decoration above the third floor windows. At the base of the soaring gable, where we discovered two pedestals that had lost their sculptures over time, we had mounted two large plaster finials. Ramon and I had found the 2-foot-high pieces one day at a local antique mall, and when we learned that they had come from an old chateau in France, it seemed the perfect fit for a chateau-esque house. After using mortar to secure them in place, we painted the scrolls and curlicues to match the rest of the house and then touched up the facade. Standing there, studying the front of the house, we all agreed that despite the aggravating nights of drunk cooking and tomfoolery, my cousins had done an incredible job of painting. Most of the surface had been covered with a layer of bright brick red, but the window ledges and surrounds were done in a deep burgundy, as were many of the flat raised trim pieces. Elsewhere, the pilasters and lengths of molding sported two contrasting shades of green, while the window frames and pieces of terracotta tracery at the roofline had been painted a deep honey yellow. Flanking the steep gable above the third floor were two intertwining pillars, which had been painted yellow and green, and at the second floor level was another set of these pillars. However, their alternating twines were painted burgundy and light green. Atop each pillar was a small stage where two strange creatures dug in their claws and bared their fangs. They were about 2 feet in length, and each had a large tail that tapered up and curled along the wall, while the head was down close to the base of the pedestal. At first, I thought they and the other lizard-like figures found on some houses throughout the neighborhood were a type of fierce sea serpent or mythological being. But after doing a bit of research, I discovered that they were most likely stylized representations of salamanders. It seems that King Francis I of France, the originator of the Chateauesque style in the 1500s, had chosen the salamander as his personal emblem, and later architects had seized upon this connection when looking for ornamental symbols in their chateau-inspired designs in this country. In old Louisville, I discovered at least 4 other homes that had salamanders in some form or other on their facades, and architects had described each of the designs as being heavily influenced by the chateau style. Salamanders were something that always fascinated me, and although Kentucky had almost 3 dozen varieties of the creature, I had never really seen a real live one up close and personal. Salamanders have long been associated with the occult, and Egyptians had a salamander hieroglyph which signified a man dead from cold. Ancient authors often ascribed mystical abilities to these animals and believed they were able to survive a blaze. Many identified salamanders with the element of fire and thought they could even extinguish flames with the frigidity of their bodies. This association with fire probably came from the fact that salamanders had been reported living in volcanoes where the constant moisture on their skin served as protection. In medieval iconography, the salamander represented someone who never lost the peace of his soul and remained confident through all difficulties. It was also a symbol of loyalty, and for the alchemist, the salamander symbolized a stone fixed in red or sulfur. Before the two terracotta salamanders on the facade of the Widmer house were painted, they were a deep red. Covered in gold leaf, now they sparkled in the early evening sun, as did the numerous wreaths, garlands, floral swags, and acanthus leaves that had also been gilded or painted metallic gold. As I stood there and studied the fierce golden salamanders from below, it somehow seemed reassuring to be living in a house guarded by two such creatures. Towering over it all, a small gold figure caught a glint of gold in the fading sunlight, and my eyes were drawn to the very peak of the highest gable. There, on an ornamental pedestal, crouched a tiny little gargoyle, all but invisible to those who knew its story. Ramon and I had found the sculpted stone image at the Louisville Antique Mall one day on an outing several weeks before, and immediately I realized it would make an ideal topper for the empty platform at the pinnacle of the house. After purchasing the small monster, we had it gilded in gold leaf and then cemented in place so it kept watch from the highest point of the house. I had named the gargoyle Sylvia in honor of Ramon's sister, but she didn't seem to appreciate the gesture as much as I did. So Sylvia's watching tonight. Everyone say hi to Sylvia. And I'm going to turn the fan back on me because it's kind of getting warm. So I chuckled, and behind me there was some movement. I turned to discover our neighbors coming up the front walk to say hello. "It's official," said Anne. "Yours is without a doubt the prettiest house in the neighborhood." After thanking her, I got her something to drink, and we stood there for a moment while I pointed out the details. "Hey, look, it's Micah!" Wendy rushed up and pointed to the opposite side of the street. Sure enough, there he was in a trench coat and shuffling along with his violin case. Without stopping, he looked up and saluted, then turned his head back to the sidewalk and made his way down 3rd Street. "The house looks fabulous," said Alan and Chris, walking by with their 2 bulldogs. "I can't believe you guys got it restored so fast." They paused to study the front of the house and nodded their approval. "It's amazing to see all the detail now," one of them said. "We've passed this house hundreds of times and never really noticed how elaborate the facade is. It's really incredible." I thanked them and invited them up to the tiny front lawn for a drink. "We've still got some work to do inside and in the backyard, but the facade is definitely finished," I said. They eagerly accepted and joined us. Just then, Dale and Bill from the next block came down the sidewalk and called out a greeting, so I waved them up to join us as well. And suddenly we had a neighborhood party. We ran inside and brought out several tables and chairs. Some people sat, others stood, but the front lawn soon filled with laughter and lively chatter. Over the next hour, other passers-by stopped to pay their compliments as well, and the front yard was packed with well-wishers nursing glasses of wine or cocktails and nibbling on canapes passed around on trays. Out on 3rd Street, a number of cars had slowed down as they passed, their windows rolled down so they could study the goings-on in front of the house. From one of them, an arm reached out the passenger side window and waved in an attempt to get somebody's attention. It was a reporter from the Courier-Journal, the main Louisville newspaper, and she wanted to know if it was true that the house was haunted. Chuckling, I told her that people had said it was haunted in the past, but that I had never seen any ghosts myself. And when she pressed for more details, I had to admit that some strange things had happened in the house since we moved in. But I quickly added the disclaimer that there was probably perfectly logical explanations for the occurrences. When I mentioned that I had begun to talk to other people in the neighborhood about their houses and the stories associated with them, and that I was planning to write a book about it, the reporter quickly grew excited and insisted on talking more. She said it would make a good article for the newspaper, and we made plans to meet the following week. As our car drove away, I noticed someone standing out of view behind a tree on the other side of the street. When I looked up, she seemed to step back and disappear into the shadows under the branches. That's when I noticed the figure had an ivory-colored turban and a brown billowy skirt. I walked several feet down the street to get a better view, but when I did, it seemed she backed up to stay hidden behind the trees. I was contemplating whether or not I should go across the street and try to engage her in conversation when a large white Mercedes slowed down and pulled up to the curb. 2 middle-aged women with dark glasses and bleached hair sat in the front seat, and they were chatting back and forth. Another woman with streaky blonde hair sat in the back seat, her face pressed up against the window. Slowly, the windows on the passenger side went down, and their conversation drifted out to the sidewalk where I had returned. But the house looks fabulous. How much do you think it cost? Oh, it couldn't have cost that much. Nobody wants to live down here in old Louisville. But I heard it's really turning around in this neighborhood. People are buying these old places and fixing them up. I know, they say old Louisville is going to be the next Savannah or Charleston. I love it here, especially over by the park. A lot of people say St. James Court and Belgravia Court are better than the Garden District in New Orleans. I know what you mean, but I could never live in this area. It's too close to downtown. And all those weirdos and so many poor people. Ew. Yeah, I suppose. I'm sure the upkeep on old houses is outrageous. You think they even have central air in these old mansions? Maybe you should tell Steve to buy a place on this street, rent it out or something. Oh, I don't think he'd be caught dead here. He's totally an East End kind of guy. Once in a while, he'll let us go to Barstown Road and eat at Lily's or Jack Fry's, but he avoids downtown like the plague. Well, they sure did a nice job on this house. I wonder what it's like on the inside. Looks like they're having a party or something. Maybe we should get out and see what it's all about. Good heavens, no. I'm not getting out in old Louisville. Yeah, we better stay in the car. Anyway, they're expecting us at the Jefferson Club in a quarter hour, so we better head that way. I was about to walk over to the car and invite them up for a drink, despite their annoying comments, but the windows on the passenger side slowly buzzed up and the car sped off. I was tempted to chase them down and tell them lots of people, in fact, did want to live in old Louisville, and that the upkeep on an old house probably wasn't any worse than it was for their houses in the East End, and that, yes, most of the places in old Louisville did have central air, but I decided against it. Anyway, I had an unfinished glass of wine waiting for me on the table where I had left it, so I went back, and the festivities resumed. Hey, would you look at that? Somebody on the steps pointed up where several bats flapped and tumbled in formation over the front yard. Not even dark yet, and you've got bats flying around, someone said. I see those 3 bats all the time, I said. Not sure what their problem is, but they're always fluttering around the house. I think they live up under the highest gable. Maybe they're friends with Sylvia the gargoyle. Over the next half hour, even more people stopped by and joined the party. Skippy went inside and brought the dogs out on their leashes, and they enjoyed a great deal of attention as people stooped to pet them. By the time the sun started to set, so many people had commented on how fabulous the house looked that an idea suddenly occurred to me. I went inside and returned with a bottle of champagne. Gathering everyone together at one corner of the house, I thanked them all for coming and then gave a brief rundown on the history of Widmer House and the work that Ramon and I and my cousins had done on the place in the short time we called it home. To a huge round of applause, we smashed the bottle of champagne against the side of the house and officially christened it La Casa Fabulosa, or the Fabulous House in Spanish. At last, I had found a name that did the house justice. Several minutes later, the sun disappeared and darkness descended over the neighborhood. The day before, Frederick had helped us install a series of floodlights in the front yard, most of them hidden among the fledgling Manhattan bushes on either side of the house, so we turned them on and illuminated the facade of La Casa Fabulosa. There was an audible lull in the conversation as people stopped what they were doing and beheld the glittering gold leaf and the bright colors before them. Then someone raised a glass and made a toast, and the celebration resumed and carried on till the wee hours of the morning. So, now you know how the Casa Fabulosa got its house. So, I think we can do another chapter or two, so grab your bourbon. If you're just checking in, say hi, let us know where you're from. Hi, Doug. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Marty. Sylvia the Gargoyle is here, so everyone say hi to Sylvia the Gargoyle. All right. So the next chapter is called Possums. And the gang, they'll remember that while we lived in the house, we had a number of house guests staying with us. And this is a chapter that involves the house guest at the time, who was a friend from Cuba. All right? So it's called Possums. So Pat and Mark had been gone for a couple of weeks, but we had more visitors at Widmer House. I kept meaning to call the glazier to fix the smashed window in the basement, but somehow I managed to keep putting it off, so most of our visitors were the four-legged creatures that squeezed themselves through the pane that had been broken out. Although my suspicions had been aroused on several occasions when I had gone down to do the laundry, I had ignored the telltale sounds of scampering feet as I turned on the light. The fact that we had a possum living in the basement was ascertained one day when Victor walked into the kitchen with a puzzled look on his face. Victor was a Cuban friend who was staying with us for a while, and he was sleeping in the guest room on the top floor. "Why don't that funny kitty cat downstairs like me to pet her?" he asked as he poured himself some orange juice. "She don't like me?" "What are you talking about?" I said. "We don't have cats anymore." The month before, our little black cat had bolted through the back door as I opened it to let out the dogs. Without so much as a look back, it bounded over the fence and disappeared into a neighbor's backyard. Although I had searched for hours and put flyers up all around the neighborhood, Ramon and I were never able to find the little cat. Where did I go? Yeah, some of you were asking me about this on the message board, asking about the cats. Well, this is what happened. Yeah, she just kind of ran away and never came back. So, although I had searched for hours and put up flyers all around the neighborhood, Ramon and I were never able to find the little cat. "You don't got kitty cats no more?" "Nope, only dogs, and none of them lives in the cellar," I said. As if on cue, Rocky, Bess, and Fritz trotted into the kitchen and sat at my feet, a clear indicator that they expected a doggy treat. "Well, who's that big mean kitty cat with the long pointy nose who live on top of the dryer, then?" Victor said. He elongated his fingers in a cone at his nose to provide a bit of visual clarification. "Every time I reach out to pet his fur, she open up and growl at me." He opened his mouth and made chomping motions. "She got the long pointy teeth." "Oh my God," I said. "You tried petting it?" I walked over to the basket where we kept the treats. "That's not a cat. That sounds like a possum." After giving each of the dogs a biscuit, I went to Victor and turned his hands over for inspection. "And don't pet them. They could bite your fingers off." "What kind of kitty cat is this possum?" He drew out the new word and tried it on for size. "I do not think we have this kind of kitty in Cuba." "It's not a kitty cat," I said. "It's more like a big greasy rat that's going bald. Sometimes they curl up and play dead, but other times they'll bite your fingers off." "Well, what you got the big hairy rat living on top of your clothes dryer for, then?" he asked. "Ask my cousin, Mark." Victor knitted his brows in vexation. "Why? He collect the big and greasy rats?" "No, he made the hole in the window, and that's how they're getting into the basement now." I went to the counter and checked on some bread dough that was rising in a covered bowl. "Which reminds me," I said, "I need to quit procrastinating and fix it once and for all." I punched the dough down and turned it out onto the surface where I began dividing it into small rolls. "You didn't think about what, Sylvia? The possums?" "Yeah, Karen, you said you love possums? I love possums too. They get a bad rap." All right. So we're going on with Victor. "Well, you no want rats in the house? It's time to put poison in the cheese." "No poison," I said. "That's so inhumane." The rats were another story, but I refused to kill the possums. "I'll see if I can borrow a live trap from Dale and Bill down the street. I'll catch the critters and then take them out to the East End, where I'll set them free." A devious smile slowly formed as I envisioned a swarm of possums descending upon a Tony East End neighborhood. "The poison, she is better." Victor grabbed his basket of laundry and went back upstairs. "But the live trap, she is more humane," I called out as he disappeared into the butler's pantry. Victor responded by informing me he was invited to a party and he would be gone most of the evening. Humming the tune to Guantanamera, he trudged up the back stairs and started to get ready. Seeing they weren't going to get any treats, Rocky and Bess retreated into the butler's pantry and took up spots on the sofa. Fritz, ever the loyal companion, sat contentedly under the table and watched while I filled the dishwasher and wiped down the counters. When I finished, I slipped him another treat without Rocky and Bess seeing, and then got back to the bread recipe. After brushing the slightly risen rolls with egg white, I turned them upside down and pressed the tops into a plate of poppy seeds before baking. When they emerged from the oven, each one crowned with a perfect dark circle of poppy seeds and filling the kitchen with a wonderful smell, I knew I'd finally hit on the right recipe. I buttered one of the rolls and shared it with the dogs, whose wagging tails indicated their approval. Afterward, I straightened up and went to the third floor to conduct some research. Ever since my conversation with Frederick, gypsies had been on my mind, and I endeavored to find as much as I could about their presence in Louisville. But before sitting down at the desk in my office, I stopped, suddenly feeling drawn to the bank of 3 windows. An odd feeling came over me, and I had the sensation that somebody was watching the house. I went to the window seat and looked out onto 3rd Street. Other than for random fireflies that flickered in the grassy areas, the road looked empty. I sat down for a moment, and Fritz jumped up beside me and took a spot on the cushion. For several minutes, we watched in silence as the specks of phosphorescent green flashed on and off. But then a low growl came from Fritz, and his ears perked up. Down below, there was movement on the sidewalk. Someone pushing a shopping cart emerged from behind a tree. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but the person looked up and stopped. The cart came to a halt, and after a long glance, the figure lowered its head and resumed its journey. I raised the middle window, and Fritz and I listened as the cart bumped and creaked over the cracked pavement and then disappeared under a canopy of leaves near the corner with Ormsby. Silence followed, but it was soon eclipsed by the electric din of cicadas, which seemed to crescendo from nothing and overtake the darkness where fireflies gently flashed. I lowered the sash to shut out the sound and scratched Fritz behind the ears. We sat there another 10 minutes staring out the window, and then I went to my desk to start my search. I turned on the computer, typed in the word gypsy, and hit the enter button. That's when the lights went out and La Casa Fabulosa was plunged into blackness. Okay. So how are we all doing? Still ready for another chapter or two? Grab a bourbon if you haven't. Tell us where you're from. Say hi. Yes, Linda. Fritz was the protector. Hey, Abby. By the way, just so you know, normally I'd be out at night giving tours of old Louisville during the day as well, but we can't, so I'm helping people while away the quarantine hours by telling stories about the neighborhood. So I'm with Louisville Historic Tours, and can't wait for things to get back to normal so we can get people down on the streets and promote old Louisville, a great Victorian neighborhood. 45 square blocks of beautiful old houses, roughly 1,400 structures in all. So go to our website, LouisvilleHistoricTours.com. Sean Stafford has been helping me a lot, Hunley Media. We're getting our line of merchandise up. You can get some things there already if you go to LouisvilleHistoricTours.com. Thanks to the people who've gone on to Amazon and given Voodoo Days some good reviews. That really helps an author. A 5-star review is better than gold. So if any of you are on Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble can give some stars. That's a great help. Also, we're on TripAdvisor, Louisville Historic Tours. So if you can do that, give us a shout out. We're trying to put old Louisville on the map, let people know what a great neighborhood it is. A lot of you are local, so you know what it's all about. Some of you might not have been here yet. You might have heard about it. So can't wait till the quarantine's over and you can come see us and we can show you the neighborhood in person. All right? So, yeah, Sue Gale, I yearn for normalcy as well. So, the next chapter is about the witch's tree. So, if some of you tuned in the very first night, we had a night where we talked about the witch's tree. But this kind of talks about how I found out about the witch's tree. So, this is about 5 or 6 pages. Then we have another chapter. If we're still all for hanging in, I'll read that chapter as well, and then we'll call it a night. Okay? But we're going to continue to the next chapter, the witch's tree. In the darkness, it was easy to hear the cicadas buzzing loudly outside, and I sat for a moment in my office, hoping that it was only a temporary blackout. A thin shaft of light filtered in through one of the 3 windows where Fritz and I had sat, and it landed on the soffit wall that jutted out over the fireplace. I had recently completed an art project on the green wall over the mantel, and specks of gold and red glittered where stencil letters and faux jewels spelled out the words to a favorite Tennessee Williams saying of mine. Quote, I love to visit the other side now and then, but on my social passport, Bohemia is indelibly stamped without regret on my part, unquote. It quickly became evident that the lights were not coming back on, so I walked to the door. Fritz trailing behind, I felt my way out of the room and to the steps leading to the lower floors, one hand gliding along the cool wood of the railing, while the other skimmed the outer wall of the stairwell. For some reason, each step provoked a loud creak as I wound my way down to the foyer, and it seemed I passed through a very cold spot on the landing between the first and second floors. I quickly convinced myself that it was only a draft and navigated the last stretch of stairway. On the very last step, I almost tripped over Rocky, who had come to find me when the lights went out. I picked up both him and Fritz and deposited them next to Bess on the sofa in the butler's pantry. Then I pulled a flashlight out of the kitchen drawer and went to the basement to check the circuit box. Fighting my way through cobwebs, I located it in a far wall and opened it. Although a quick sweep of the flashlight revealed that none of the circuits had blown, I flipped the switches on and off anyway. But the house remained in darkness. After several more attempts, I gave up and left the dark cellar. In the kitchen, I peered through a window into the back alley and saw that lights shone brightly in all the neighboring houses. I decided to go to the front door and see if 3rd Street had any light. Approaching the door, I was somewhat comforted to see the glare from the street lamps wash across the shiny floor in the foyer, but I shrank back when a hunched-over form arose in front of the door and blocked out most of the light. Because of the lace curtains hanging over the windows in the door, the shadow was somewhat obscured. However, it appeared that someone had risen from a crouching position on the front porch. The form quickly ran down the front steps and disappeared into the darkness. My heart racing, I inched my way to the door and pulled back the curtains. When I'd ascertained that nobody was in the immediate proximity, I walked outside and looked around. The street in front of the house was empty, but down near the corner of Oak Street, under the hazy glare of the street lamp, I saw a bit of movement on the sidewalk and realized it was someone pushing a shopping cart in my direction. A faint creaking sound arose as it neared and got louder the closer it got to the house. There were several shopping bags of groceries in the cart, and if the woman pushing it saw me watching her from the porch, she didn't show it as she bumped the cart down the rest of the blocks and disappeared from view. Even after she was gone, I could still hear the faint rasp of the metal cart as it continued down 3rd Street. Shaking my head, I turned to go back into the house, but something caught my attention. There, on the tile floor in front of the welcome mat, was a small pile of sticks. But unlike the bundle I had found before, this was a little mound that could have been the beginning of somebody's campfire. One by one, twigs had been stood upright so as to lean in and form a small teepee shape. It was directly in my path from the front door to the steps, and I couldn't figure out how I had so completely missed it when I first came out of the house. I must have stepped right over it. Irritated, I used my foot to sweep the mound of sticks into the nearest flower bed, and I sauntered down the steps to the end of the walkway and looked both ways down the street. Although random shadows seemed to skulk about here and there, lurking behind bushes and creeping along the curbs, none of them appeared to be the stick witch, or Josephine, or anyone else who might have left a pile of sticks on my front stoop. Maybe it was Frederick or Lewis playing a prank, I told myself. The neighborhood and all its weird characters, I realized, were starting to annoy me. Bohemia was one thing, Crazy Town was something else altogether. I scratched my head and decided to return to my darkened house and find out what had caused the blackout. But when I returned to go back up the front walkway, there was a surging kind of click, and all at once, I saw that blazing light shone through every single window of La Casa Fabulosa. In the foyer stood Rocky, Bess, and Fritz, their fuzzy silhouettes outlined against the bright light flooding through the iron grill of the old security door. For a minute, my jaw dropped, and I stood there trying to take it all in. How had all the lights come on when most weren't turned on in the first place? Only a few of the lights had been turned on before the power went out. But could I have inadvertently hit some of the light switches as I fumbled my way through the darkness? I pushed through the door and walked back to the butler's pantry, where the dogs joined me. I gave them each a treat and settled them in on the couch in front of the television, which had also come on, although I hadn't used it even once during the day. Then I made my way to the upper floors to turn off the unnecessary lights. As I feared, every single light had been turned on. Well, every one except the light in the little room at the back of the second floor, which sat dark and quiet behind the closed door. When I went inside, the room seemed unnaturally cold, so I quickly closed the door and left. In the butler's pantry, the dogs were getting antsy and looking forward to their evening stroll, but I was somewhat leery about leaving. Ramon would be getting home from work soon, and as I debated whether or not it would be best to wait, the landline rang in the foyer. I went to answer it. "Heidi-ho!" said a somewhat gruff voice from the other end. It sounded like an older woman. "Hi?" I said with a note of hesitancy. "Heidi-ho!" repeated the voice. "You know you got a bum out in your back alley, don't you?" "Who is this?" "You heard me right. You got a bum in your back alley," she said. "I saw him snooping around your black car. Better go on and check now." I know. Ashley loves Loretti. Okay. Yep. But I wanted to argue with this woman, but the sense of urgency convinced me to go check out the backyard and the car and get more details later. "Okay, give me a second." I headed through the kitchen to the back alley. For security, I grabbed a rolling pin on the way out. But when I crossed the raised deck and found myself looking at my parked car, there's nobody in sight. I opened the gate and went out into the alley, but I couldn't see anything. I looked both ways down the alley, and save for a car passing on Oak Street, there was nothing to see. "You were too slow," the voice reprimanded me when I picked up the phone. "He got away. Skedaddled across the alley and into the backyard of one of them houses facing 4th Street, where it was all dark and shadowy." Well, I thought I was moving pretty quickly, but I guess not fast enough. I was getting ready to ask who she was and how she had my number when she cut me off. "Yeah, and he was a gimp too, so you should have caught him." At the other end, there was a phlegmy cough, which was followed by a cackle. "It's like he sensed you coming the minute you put the phone down, and he hightailed it on out of there. But like I said, he can't move too fast." "You mean he's handicapped?" "Yep, he's a gimp. Call it whatever you like, but he needs a cane to get around. Probably one of them bums at the corner of 4th and Crazy, pestering people for handouts. Maybe a truck rolled over his foot. Maybe he was born a gimp and he got the club foot. God only knows." There's another bout of coughing, and it sounded like she was holding the phone away from her mouth. "Hang on a bit, hun," she said, and resumed coughing. When she came back on the line, there was a sharp intake of breath, and she spoke in a low voice. "Hold on now. It looks like that bum is headed down 4th Street now. Maybe for the park." "You can see him? How can you see him? And who are you, by the way?" "Sure, I can see him. I can see practically all the neighborhood bums," she said. "Hang on a second while I watch him gimping his way down the street. Yeah, looks like he's going for the park." "Well, that's nice to know," I said, "but I still have no idea who you are and how it is you can see all the neighborhood bums." "I'm Loretti, your neighborhood watch. I'm your neighbor, but you don't know me." She coughed once and chuckled pleasantly. "I've lived in this neighborhood for years." "If you're my neighbor," I said, "how is it that we haven't met? And how come you know my phone number and who I am?" "That's easy. I looked you up in the phone book." There was some shuffling at the other end, and it sounded like she was slurping a drink of something. "And when I know your name, it's because I asked around after you started fixing up that house. We've been watching your progress ever since you started painting all them pretty colors." "There's more than one of you? Who are you, anyway?" "I told you already, hun. I'm Loretti. Hang on a second while I get another swig of my bourbon." There was a long pause, after which came another slurping sound and the smacking of lips. I'm Loretti, your neighbor across the street." "Across the street?" Tugging the cord of the phone along behind me, I walked into the darkened parlor and looked out the front window. A good section of the block on the other side was occupied by a 16-story residential high-rise built in the 1960s known as the Hillebrand House. Many considered it a sort of eyesore, but I had come to disapprove of it only when I saw a photo of the beautiful Peabody mansion that had been demolished to make room for it. In any case, it seemed like fire trucks and EMS vehicles were there at all hours of the day, tending to the residents' various emergencies. You're not in the Hillebrand house, I said, are you? Yes, sirree, Bob. Yes, indeedy, she said. That's exactly where I am. Been here a number of years now, and I don't get out much anymore. My living room window looks out onto 3rd Street. As she coughed and took another loud drink, I moved closer to the window and raised my head to get a better look at the building, most of whose windows had gone dark. What floor are you on? I said. I'm way up top, she said. Got a bird's eye view up here. Wait, can you see me? I was about to tell her there was no way I'd be able to see her when a light went on in one of the windows at the top of the building, and it quickly flashed on and off several times. Ah, is that you flipping the light on and off? Yes, sirree, Bob. Yes, indeedy, she said. Here I am, Loretti of Hillebrand, at your service. Well, Loretti, nice to meet you, I said, turning on a light so she could see me, and I waved and then extinguished the light. All righty then, I see you, she cackled. That's a pretty blue shirt you got on there. You can see what kind of shirt I'm wearing all the way from up there? Looking up at the dark window where she sat, I wondered if Loretti would hit the lights again, but she didn't. Instead, there came another round of coughing before she spoke again. Well, that's because I got a little extra help up here. I got a pair of field glasses my daddy brought back from WW2. Got them off a dead kraut, and they're the good kind too, so I can see real far. She laughed. And you'd be surprised how much we can see up here, and how much of the neighborhood. She paused and took a swallow of her drink. I can see for blocks, and, I've been keeping track of your gimpy bum as we've been talking. Looks like he's over by the witch's tree right now. You can see the witch's tree from up there? The back of the house, the dog started barking, but quickly stopped. Ramon must have come in the back door, so I decided to wrap up the conversation, and before she had a chance to respond, I changed the subject. Say, you didn't see anyone on my front porch before you called, did you? I saw someone out there, and when I went to check, all I found was a pile of sticks. You think it was the guy snooping around in the back alley? Sticks? Said Loretti. No, I didn't see anyone on your front porch, but I don't think it was a gimp that did it. That sounds like the stick witch. She's that crazy old bat who pushes around her shopping cart full of sticks. So she's a real person, I said. She's been around forever, probably longer than I have, she laughed. I see her all over the neighborhood in all hours of the day. Loretti coughed and told me to hang on for a minute. When she was done, I got back on the line and took a drink of her bourbon. She said, listen, hon, I need to let you go so I can go and watch my program. I'll call you the next time I see that gimp or any of the other bums snooping around the back alley. Well, thanks for calling, I said. It's been nice talking to you. And just like that, Loretti was gone. I walked into the dining room as the swinging doors opened, and in walked Ramon from the butler's pantry. What are you doing? He said. Talking to a lady who lives across the street in the Hillebrand house. I walked into the kitchen for a piece of blueberry pie, and between bites I filled him in on what Loretti had told me. After the last mouthful, I washed it all down with a huge glass of cold milk. Then I told him about the lights going on and off and the pile of sticks at the front door. Probably one of the bums from down on Oak Street, he said. Maybe we should get a security camera for the back of the house. Maybe, I said, but it sounds like Loretti is as good as any security system. She said she'd call if she sees anything. Shrugging his shoulders, Ramon went upstairs to watch television. The dogs were prancing at the kitchen door, so I hooked them to their leads, and we left through the back alley for a nice long walk. A half hour later, my head had cleared as we strolled on 3rd Street and through Belgravia Court. Although the evening was warm, a bit of chill tinged the breeze that rustled the leaves near the gas lights around the fountains on St. James Court. On the green at the south end of the boulevard, there was an assemblage of a dozen people or so, and I smiled to see that they were playing a nighttime round of croquet. They were attired in light colors and pastels that made them stand out in the darkness. That's when I noticed they were all in Victorian attire. The women wore bustle dresses, and some sported lacy parasols. The males had on striped jackets, pleated white slacks, and straw boaters. Fascinated, I watched them for several minutes. Save for the clacking of balls and a wooden mallet every now and then, the group made very little noise. Shadows fluttered across the front of a white Georgian mansion with blue shutters. Built in the early 1900s, it was once home to the famous Kentucky poet Madison K. Wine. Now it was home to another local literary figure, celebrated author Synergido Naslund. As we passed, an unseen hand drew back a lacy curtain from a window on the second floor, and a dark form peered down at me before receding into the darkness. The wind picked up as we cut through Central Park on our return home, and I realized that we were only a couple hundred yards from the Witch's Tree. Instead of taking the path to the right, we veered left and headed for the corner of 6th and Park. If a witch was leaving sticks on my front porch, I might as well go and see where she hung out. I was also curious if I'd see the limping man Loretta had warned me about. A gibbous moon hung low in the sky as the dogs eagerly tugged their way to a new destination. We passed under a wisteria-laden pergola and picked up the path that exited the northwest corner of the park. After crossing the street, I took up a position along the brick wall of a large residence that had formerly served as a cloistered monastery, and studied the adjacent corner, the corner where the Witch's Tree stood. Other than the soft tunes from a radio wafting through an open window, all was quiet. Hey, Greer. Hey, Timothy. So the tree in question stood along a thin hedge, and the reason locals referred to it as the Witch's Tree became apparent as soon as we left the shadow of the brick wall and approached the patch of ground illuminated in the glare of the nearby street lamp. A solid, knobby trunk shot up into a mass of tangled limbs, and spindly black branches pointed downward in a thick canopy that cast a glum shadow over gnarled roots poking through the bare earth at its base. Green mold and whorls covered the bark, and a multitude of wart-like burls and knots blistered and extended the surface, transforming the tree into a living mass of wooden growths and gnarls. A tree for witches indeed. I'd done a little snooping since hearing Frederick mention the tree, and managed to piece together the legend behind it. Despite the scientific and technological advances of the 19th century, it seemed that many parts of Kentucky's largest city held on to old superstitions, and belief in curses, black magic, and witches was commonplace. Given that the riverboat and rail connections to New Orleans and other points in the South ensured a constant stream of followers of the occult, voodoo practitioners kept the neighborhood that is old Louisville today hopping with supernatural action. The Witch's Tree emerged as a meeting point for many of these dabblers in the black arts. According to local lore, the tree, known as the Witch's Tree, started its life as a majestic towering maple that sprang up practically overnight in the 1800s when the Domine family still owned the land. Famed for their lovely flower beds and hedgerows that graced the grounds of the estate, the Dominoes once maintained an adjacent tract of land dedicated to the cultivation of ornamental shrubs, myriad rose bushes, and a wide variety of flowers. Locals named it the Domino Botanical Gardens, and it became a popular destination for visitors in search of a bit of rest and relaxation from the hustle and bustle of city life in the 19th century metropolis. During the warm months of the Great Southern Exposition from 1883 to 1887, the garden's shady pathways and fragrant blooms provided welcome relief from the Kentucky sun to thousands of visitors from around the world. When word later got out that the Dominoes planned to sell their beautiful gardens, that the planners would develop the land to construct houses, many people in the neighborhood were heartbroken to think they would lose their treasured botanical gardens. The most distraught of all, however, was the coven of local witches. The imposing tree, with its perfectly straight trunk, had become the preferred gathering spot for nightly rituals where they mixed potions and cast spells on those who incurred their wrath or curried their favor. They had almost lost it once before, and they weren't ready to risk it again. By most accounts, problems began in the spring of 1889 as locals began preparations for their annual May Day celebrations. Given their connections to the hardwood industry, it fell to the family of lumber barons, the Mengels, to organize the neighborhood May Day celebrations every year. With tons of logs at their disposal, they usually sent their employees to pick out the tallest and straightest one to be erected and decorated as a maypole. But in 1889, Clarence Mengel decided to cut down a local tree instead, the beautiful maple at the corner of 6th and Park. Of course, the local witches were less than thrilled to learn that their beloved maple had been singled out for its flawless shape and impressive height. At the end of April, the witches learned their tree would be cut down, shorn of its branches, and then festooned as a maypole. The witches got together and posted a parchment note on their tree, addressing it to Mr. Mengel. It warned that a terrible calamity would befall the city in exactly 11 months if their wishes were ignored and the tree cut down. But on the last day of April, 2 woodsmen from the Mengel factory cut down the tree, and the next day, the lovely maple was resurrected in a different location, decorated with fresh flowers, colorful ribbons, and boughs of greenery. Mr. Mengel officiated at the ceremony, and the celebrations went off without a hitch. After the May Day festivities, the trunk was dried, cut, and burnt in a great Whitsuntide bonfire. By the time the heat of summer arrived, most had forgotten about the witch's warning and the beautiful maple tree. When the winds of fall and winter started whipping through the neighborhood, rumors had it that the coven had moved to a distant forest where they had resumed their nightly gatherings and castings of spells. When the townspeople began planning for the next May Day celebration in April, the witch's curse had slipped from memory. But exactly 11 months later, on the evening of March 27, 1890, the most destructive tornado in the history of Louisville roared in from the west and destroyed a large portion of the city. Within 5 minutes, more than 600 buildings, including some 500 homes, 10 tobacco warehouses, 3 schools, and the downtown train station, had been shattered like so much kindling. It was also reported that the winds had wreaked havoc at the Mengel's lumber works. In the end, more than 100 lives were lost, several of the victims from the Mengel family. And eyewitnesses reported something curious. Before the winds of the storm had subsided, the tornado had made a strange right-hand turn and roared from downtown into the neighborhood around the Domine Botanical Gardens. As the twister passed the stump where the lovely old maple tree had stood, a mighty bolt of lightning shot out and struck the stump, and a gnarled and twisted tree magically sprouted up on the spot, one that replaced the one stolen from the witches. Rumor had it that the coven of witches soon returned to resume their nightly rituals on the old spot, but with a new tree, and to this day, people say that the gnarled old tree violently rattles its dead and twisted branches in warning whenever a tornado threatens the neighborhood. A low wind surged just then, and as if sensing my thoughts, the jagged branches of the spooky tree clattered, a brittle admonition, while the dogs and I came to understand the history. It stood in the corner of a small plot of land that served as a front yard for a large brick apartment house from the early 1900s, and I wondered how so many of the residents knew the story behind the eerie-looking tree without me ever hearing about it. Probably not too many, I concluded. In the end, studying the balconies where several unconcerned tenants sat at small tables looking out over the yard and the tree. There was a slight commotion under the tree, and a dark form fluttered around the trunk and shot through the hedge. The dogs went crazy and tried to chase it, but I managed to keep them under control as it skittered along Park Avenue. At first I thought it had to be a dog or a cat, but as it passed under the light of the street lamp, I saw it was a wild turkey. With a loud screech and a throaty gobble, it jerked and raced into a backyard where it disappeared. Wild turkeys in old Louisville? I was about to turn and head back to the house when a light went on over the doorway of a darkened balcony above. From a slamming screen door emerged a woman in brightly colored skirts and a green turban. Josephine. Ample hips swaying, she walked to the railing and leaned against it as she gazed down at the gnarled old tree. So that's the end of that chapter. Cheers. Just checking in. Say hi. So if you're all game, I can read one last chapter. We're going to go way over an hour tonight, I think. But this last chapter is 4 pages. So if you want, we can do this last chapter and then we'll resume tomorrow night. Okay? So this chapter is called The Crowghetto. And if any of you lived in old Louisville or know about old Louisville, you know about the Crowghetto. Okay? So, the Crowghetto. I quickly yanked the dogs out of sight and crouched behind the hedge. Through a hole in the foliage, I watched as Josephine raised a hand that had been dangling at her side and lifted a huge cigar to her lips. As she inhaled, the white ash at the tip flared in a blaze of intense orange, and a thin wisp of smoke snaked its way to the balcony above. She exhaled a lazy, billowy puff that scrimmed over her face and dissipated in a hazy cloud that drifted out over the courtyard below. While the sweetly acrid smoke tickled my nose, I shifted my weight and eased myself down into a sitting position on the curb. After another long drag on the cigar, Josephine reached over and grabbed a large silver goblet she had placed on the railing and took a long drink. After settling the ornate container back on the railing, she turned her head and called over her shoulder to a vague form that hovered in the light of the room behind her. "Andre, you got them ingredients?" Her speech had a slightly French accent to it, Cajun or Creole perhaps. She took another long drag on her cigar and exhaled. "The full moon, she is coming." Overhead, a low-flying UPS jet sliced its way across the sky as it came in for a landing at the airport. "No," a deep male voice said in response. "I ain't had the time. You stop at the Crogetto tomorrow after work and get 'em." After another dram from the goblet, Josephine put the cigar back to her lips and blew out a long stream of vaporous white. "Broke dick man," she cursed. "Always having to do things myself." The screen door slammed behind her as a shadow retreated and disappeared into the dim glare of the apartment. Several moments later, someone extinguished the lights, and all the windows went black. What was Josephine going to buy? With the dogs eagerly responding to my movement, I rose slowly from my sitting position and brushed dry grass from the seat of my pants. Taking one last glance at the witch's tree before I left, I followed the dogs as they pulled me along. The dogs were still energetic, so we took the long way home and walked over to the corner of Ormsby and First Street. From a hedgerow, a fragrant olive, the street scent of apricots filled the air. Over on the southwest corner loomed a large Gothic church constructed of red brick. Up near the crown of the squat corner tower, illuminated by floodlights, a series of gargoyles seemed to glare down at us. In front of a large brick house, festooned with an abundance of terracotta ornamentation, the dogs became fascinated with something, and I stopped while they rooted around in the corner of the yard. When I went to see what they were sniffing at and snuffling at, I discovered something I had never noticed in all of the times I had walked by. There, nestled in the ivy, was a remnant of the days when they still used horses in the neighborhood. It was a hitching post, but this one appeared to be made of poured concrete. After moving some of the vines to the side where I was able to get a better look, I saw that the really interesting thing was that it had been poured in the shape of a large, flat tree stump. Grooves along the trunk simulated bark, and the flat part of the stump where the solid iron ring had been attached even had visible concentric growth rings. Immediately, I recalled the story about the witch's tree and how it had sprung up from the trunk of an old maple tree, and I had to wonder at the coincidence of my coming across another stump minutes after leaving the other tree. But it was getting late, and I had to get back home and hit the hay. In my mind, I was already formulating plans to go looking for Josephine the next day at the Crogetto. Most people will tell you a minor problem with old Louisville is the lack of decent supermarkets. Aside from a couple of tiny neighborhood grocery stores, there still aren't many supermarket selections in the immediate vicinity to this day. When I moved there, there was the Winn-Dixie at the corner of 4th and Crazy, but that ended up closing, and the only supermarket left was the Kroger store several blocks away on 2nd Street, not too far from downtown. Many in old Louisville call it the Crogetto, and they only go there when they don't have time to drive somewhere else, like the new Kroger out by the track, or the dirty Kroger over on Bardstown Road. Incidentally, I never really understood why they insisted on calling that one the dirty Kroger, because it always seems clean and sparkly to me. In fact, much cleaner than the one on 2nd Street, the one known as the Crogetto. Since I always tried to patronize neighborhood establishments, I tended to shop at the Crogetto more than most in old Louisville. Nonetheless, when I closed the front door behind me the day after I had overheard Josephine's plans and walked the 3 blocks down to the supermarket, I was reluctant to make the trip. It seemed that every time you stopped there, you had to plan on spending at least 3 times the amount of time you spend at any other normal grocery store. And most of the cashiers back then were possessed of an attitude that could be described as lackadaisical at best and plain grumpy at worst. If they weren't waiting for a manager to come and void an order they had rung up the wrong way because they couldn't remember the correct produce codes, they were ignoring patrons and telling their neighbor cashier about the party they went to the night before. Granted, the customers were no doubt a source of their grumpiness. When they weren't arguing with the cashiers, they were holding up the line, deciding which of their items to throw back because they had gone over their budget. or else they were having problems trying to figure out how to use the credit card swiper, or copying an attitude because the cashier had to send someone back to the meat department to check on the price because they had just picked up the one package of bologna or chicken thighs that didn't have a price tag on it. The first time I shopped at the 2nd Street Kroger, I only bought 5 items, but I was in the store for almost an hour because it took me that long to go through the line. To start with, the woman in front of me got into a spat with the checkout girl about whether or not Juicy Juice was covered under food stamps. It was. Then she had to decide which to return, the sour cream coffee cake or the jumbo-sized bag of frozen mixed vegetables, because her total came to $53.29 and she only had $50. She returned the vegetables. Then, when I finally got to unload my shopping basket a quarter hour later, there was a problem with each of my 5 items. First, the cashier mistook my new red potatoes for radishes, and we had to wait 5 minutes before a manager arrived to void up the price for the radishes, $1.79 for a 1-pound bag. After that, the scanner wouldn't read the barcode on the ruler I needed for a crafts project at home, and after 5 minutes of failed attempts, she gave up and rang it up manually as only 10 cents, a savings of $1.09 for me. Then she rang up my cilantro as parsley, and we had to wait another 5 minutes for the manager, though it really wasn't necessary since they both cost the same amount, 79 cents a bunch. By the time the man with the mop and pail cleaned up the mess she made after dropping my jar of dill pickles on the floor, another 10 minutes had passed, and she still had to go and get a replacement jar. I thought we were home free when she rang up my last item, a Baby Ruth candy bar. However, it came up to $99 instead of 99 cents. We had to wait another 5 minutes to get it voided. She manually rang it up and only charged me 10 cents for it in the end, but it still got on my nerves. Although most trips to the Krogetto didn't take that long, they still tended to involve more problems than the Kroger stores in other parts of town. So when I walked through the sliding glass doors into the dim interior that day in search of Josephine, I prepared myself for the worst. Even though I had come to spy on somebody, I needed to buy something as a pretext, and I was sure that whatever it was, it would invariably involve trouble at the cash register. Therefore, and out of nostalgia, I decided to buy a Baby Ruth and nothing else. I would take it home and see how long I could wait before eating it. 2 days, I was hoping. As I went to peruse the candy aisle, I made sure to keep an eye out for Josephine. It was about 5. Assuming that she worked until 5, she could show up any moment. After tossing the candy bar into the basket, I need to kill time, so I moseyed over to the meat department and checked on the price of ribeyes, and then went to the bakery section and looked longingly at a tray of frosted chocolate brownies. Eventually, I tore myself away from the baked goods and walked through the produce department to the aisle with household cleaners, all without any sign of Josephine. A half hour later, I had walked every inch of the floor in the store, and I started to worry that my solitary candy bar might arouse suspicion. I decided to make one last sweep of the store when I ran into Cookie. Cookie was a man I had met several years before when I was a grad student at the University of Louisville, and I tried to avoid him. Unfortunately, he always managed to spy me before I saw him, and escape usually proved impossible, as it was this day in the Krogetto. He saw me and smiled and zoomed over with his cart. "How you doing?" he asked. "Oh, I'm fine, thanks." Cookie was always friendly enough, but a little creepy. I'm sure it had something to do with the lascivious grin that was always on his face. Other than his basic greetings and farewells, I could hardly understand a word of what he said, so I preferred to make our encounters as brief and painless as possible. The only word I was ever able to understand was the word cookie or cookies, which he tended to use in abundance, and for that reason I called him Cookie. He had told me his name on one occasion, but of course I wasn't able to understand what he said. Surreptitiously, I tried to maneuver around his cart, but he had parked it sideways so it blocked most of the aisle. "How about some of that? Give me some of that cookies," he said with a big grin and a wink. In response, I politely rolled my eyes and prepared myself for the same conversation that played out every time Cookie cornered me in old Louisville. "Excuse me?" I said, my shoulders drooping slightly. "How's about give me some of that cookies?" His eyebrows arched in eagerness. "What?" I protested meekly. "I don't understand you." "You know what I says," he said. "You gonna give me some of that cookies?" "I don't know what you're saying. All I understand is cookie." He nodded his head eagerly. "Cookies, when are you gonna get some of that, one of that?" "What about cookies?" I said. Time to get some of that one of that cookies. He rubbed his hands together and smiled. I still don't know what you're talking about, I said, and I don't have any cookies. There, I said, pointing to the cookie aisle. Go get some there. There's a ton of cookies right there. He furrowed his brow and he frowned. Want a damn cookies over here. He pointed at me and grinned. Good cookies. Oh, well then, nice talking to you. Try the bakery section. I saw some nice cookies over there. I took advantage of his newfound good humor and scooted around his cart. I had lost my sweet tooth, and the cash register lines looked exceptionally long, so I returned the Baby Ruth to the white, blue, and red box where I'd found it, and I beat a hasty retreat out the front door. I'd had enough of the Crogetto, and I would have to find Josephine later. So that's where we're going to end our reading tonight. So thanks for hanging in. Maybe tomorrow night we'll actually have an encounter with Josephine. But we got some other colorful characters coming up and some more spooky things. So thanks for hanging out tonight, people. I hope you had a great Easter. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday night. Cheers. Hope you're all coping well. Hope you have a great week up ahead. Like I said, glad you're joining me for a reading of Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa, my 12th book. Check us out on LouisvilleHistoricTours.com. Thanks for all the people helping with reviews and helping us get the word out about old Louisville. It's good hanging out with you tonight. There's Veronica. I know Veronica liked the cookie section. Did Kelly Cray check in tonight? She said she loved the cookie section as well, so I hope she will check in eventually. But good to see all you regulars tuning back in every night. If you're a newcomer, welcome. But I think we're about a third of the way, so we got another probably good 10 nights out of this. So the next 10 nights, 2 weeks, plan on tuning in at 9 o'clock, and we'll hang out together, and I'll tell you a little more about the neighborhood. There's Margie Cook. By the way, Margie Cook lives in the Hillebrand house where Loretti lived, and we're going to hear more from Loretti. She was like a built-in alarm system. Whenever anything happened in the house, she always called and let me know. So love seeing all the neighborhood people check in, and if you're not from the neighborhood or from Louisville, make sure you make plans to come and see us when this is all over. We'd love to show you around the neighborhood. So thanks, Charles, and thanks for all the great comments, and hope you're all doing well and staying healthy. We'll see you tomorrow night, okay? Take care. Love you all.